Assalamualaikum. Welcome to a brand new video, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arfat. Today we have some Quran study, if you want to call it. And one of my favorite chapter of the Quran is chapter 63 of the Quran, Surah Al-Munafiqun, the hypocrites. And in particular, the last few verses, last few ayat of the Quran of this chapter really struck me, and this is definitely one of my favorite few verses of the Quran, because of the depth of its meaning. And throughout this whole chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have been saying, reminding or telling the stories to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the hypocrites, people who claim that they have belief, but then they disbelieve. Thumma kafaru. They have belief and then they disbelieve. And then throughout the whole narrative, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have been informing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that these people will appear like their outward appearance is like they look very pious. One way to interpret this verse, this chapter, is that the outward appearance of people, they look very pious, and when they speak, when they speak, it is like block of woods pile up. Okay, well, what does that mean? It is a metaphor. Okay, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use parables as well. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 24 of the Quran, verse 35, mentioned that it is through these parables, okay, that He explained things to human beings. And so you can find that there are many parables throughout the Quran as well. And the way to see that the Quran is actually a continuation, okay, is so-called like the updated edition of the Torah and the Injil, okay, is that because even in the present Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible that we have, as well as the New Testament that we have, okay, there are parables, many countless number of parables, especially in the Gospels. For example, parables of the mustard seed. Okay, that is very aligned pretty much with the Islamic tradition as well. Yeah, and so there's many parables of the sower, for example, you find in Luke. And so if you read the scripture, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, especially the New Testament to the Quran, you'll find that you'll find many similarities. Okay, and one of the similarities that I found very the ones that very struck me the most is the Pharisees and the Sadducees. If you remember the Gospels in the Synoptics, whereby the Pharisees question Jesus, why does your disciples pick up grain during the Sabbath? Why does your disciples eat with an unclean hands when they never wash their hands? Okay. And even when Jesus was in the temple, the synagogue, okay, He lambasted all these people, say that in your outward appearance, okay, you look pious. And in Mark, as well as in the Synoptics, Jesus says that do not pray just to be seen of people. Before you actually give charity, make sure that the money sweat in your hand, the coins sweat in your hand, meaning that you have to think before you give. Don't just give just to be seen of people. And when especially during the salah, during the prayer. And so there are many similarities, and one of the similarities that I found very striking to me is Surah Al-Munafiqun, because it just reminds me of how Jesus lambasted the Sadducees and the Pharisees as represented by the synoptic authors. And so And to me, I believe that story is historical. even though some historians would actually, those that argue, whereby those evangelical Christians who try to defend that, because especially in the Gospels, as well as in Paul, okay, but more so in John, the Gospel of John, it portrays whereby, and this is true throughout the history of Catholicism as well, whereby the Jews have been, this is according to Matthew's Gospel, the Jews have been blamed for killing God. Okay, they are God killer, Christ killer. And so Jews have been persecuted based on the Catholic Church for many centuries. And so evangelical scholars or evangelists themselves, missionaries, who try to defend, saying that no, the New Testament is not anti-Jewish, okay, but that is antithetical to whatever that is described in the Gospel. And so that is the reason why I believe that this is probably historical. And if we were to use some theology into this, the Qur'an support this as well, okay, especially Surah Maryam. Now when we're dealing with the Jews here, we're dealing with what the Jews that have been described or represented by the synoptics as well as by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, we cannot really open it up and say that all Jews are like this. In fact, that is completely wrong as well. Okay, because in the Quran itself mentions that some you'll find amongst the Christians and the Jews, whereby they are very God-fearing, they are very pious, they are very nice people. Okay, and so it is wrong, and there's a lot of misinterpretations of the ayah of the Quran out there, whereby they just interpret and say that this is open up to the whole Jewish community, or open up to the whole Christian community, open up to the whole pagan community, and that is an abuse of the ayah of the Quran, because you have to understand, that's why history is very important and not just theology, whereby every single ayah of the Quran has its own context, has its own historical background. For example, if you read Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, the one that has the most verses, Surah Al-Baqarah wasn't revealed, from verse 1 all the way to the end in one go. Some of the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed after some of the verses. Okay, and mostly the shorter verses are the Meccan verses, and the longer verses are the Medinan verses. Yeah, because the shortened verses are the Meccan verses, because that is emphasizing on Tawheed, emphasizing on what is important, what is immediate. Okay, because especially early on, okay, the first part of the Meccan verses and chapters of the Quran, especially Surah Al-Ikhlas, whereby it is basically most focused on Tawheed, because the Muslims, they're new Muslims there, and so they're just being so-called converted by Rasulullah SAW, and so they can't really take in too much of all this law. Okay, and so the immediate importance is Tawheed, and that is also one of the guiding principles for us to give da'wah, okay, to engage in missionary activities. It is, and how we speak to people even, okay, emphasize on Tawheed, La ilaha illallah. Okay. And so back to the verse here. I will not recite to you the very first few verses, because the point of this video is just to speak about the final, the final few verses, the last 5 verses or so, which I found very, very striking. And it is here, O you who believe, let not your properties, nor your children distract you from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah actually mentions the word distraction, distraction earlier on, to emphasize, and this is found as well in the Greek New Testament as well as in the Torah as well, whereby the thing that the very the main subject, okay, of discussion has been brought forward for emphasis. Okay. And the main subject here, the main topic of conversation here, is not about your properties. No, it is about your children. It is actually about the word distraction. Okay, because let not distract you is the liberal, what do you want to call it? Literal translation. La tulhikum. Okay, let not distract you. What let not distract you? Okay. Amwalukum, your properties. Okay, wala auladukum, nor your children. Okay, wala, nor your children. Okay, and so this is very important. And also the other point that connects to let not distract you from what? Okay, from the remembrance of Allah, dhikrillah. Let not your properties and your children distract you from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, and so this is very striking. This is very, very, very striking. And then the next ayah goes. This is very, very this very, very struck me. Okay, and whosoever does that, okay, then they are the losers. Okay. Whoever allows their children or their properties to distract them from the remembrance of Allah, the dhikrillah, then they are amongst the losers. And this is very striking. Okay. This is, again, if we draw parallels from the New Testament, which I like to do, in Matthew and in Mark, you find that this person came to Jesus and said that I have been good, I have done all this Torah commandment. But then Jesus said, no, you have not done one very, very important thing, and that is sell away all your properties. Sell away all your properties. And this is what Jesus said, told the person, okay, in Mark and Matthew. Sell away all your properties and then join me in my missionary. This is what Jesus allegedly say. Again, we don't know whether Jesus said this or not. I believe that this is historical. Okay, there are many evidence which this is not the right video to do that, but we can dedicate a separate video. But a lot of scholars believe that this is also highly likely a historical statement from the historical Jesus. Okay, because it is so it coheres so much with the Torah, the teachings of the Torah. Love your neighbor like yourself, which is also the teachings in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and so there's so many similarities. And if you are familiar with the New Testament, and when you read the Qur'an, these stories in the New Testament, these stories in the Torah, for example, Leviticus and Numbers, you will start coming back to you and say that, hold on a minute, this is very similar. Hold on a minute, this is very similar. And so for those of you who have read the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, and then when you read the Quran, you start to realize that this must be a continuation of the Abrahamic scripture. It cannot be divided away. All the prophets, the Jewish prophets that's mentioned in the Quran, is found in the Torah as well. For example, Yahya alayhi salam, it is found in the New Testament. It is found in the Bible, even though it is not found in the Old Testament. Prophet Daniel is mentioned here. Okay. If Prophet Dawood, David, Solomon, Sulaiman, it is mentioned here in especially Prophet David alayhi salam. It is mentioned even in the New Testament. Jesus allegedly quotes Dawood alayhi salam. The quotation is not found in the Quran, and I believe that these quotations from Jesus of Dawood alayhi salam, or not actually direct quotations, but the story that Jesus narrates about Dawood alayhi salam, I believe that it is historical. Because why would Jesus quote Dawood alayhi salam? When the Jews claim that Jesus is actually not from the lineage of David. But it could be argued otherwise as well, because the New Testament author, they wanted so much to make Jesus from the lineage of David. That again, some scholars have argued this, but I believe that this is a very strong argument. But from a theological perspective, I believe that whatever Jesus narrates of David alayhi salam is highly historical, based on theological grounds. Obviously, from a historical, using the Western historiographical method, obviously that argument is weak. But if you remove history and you include theology in it, it is highly plausible, because of the similar in theology. Because never mind. We return back to the Quran. But sometimes I just can't help but draw parallels in the old, the scripture or the Bible, and so whoever let their children and their properties and their children, distract them from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are the losers. The ayat is very strong here. If you just recite al-khasirun, it is the losers, with the alif lam there, the definite article. The losers. وَأَنْفِقُوا, and spend, wise, and أَنْفِقُوا, spend in charity. And spend what? Of that which Allah have provided you. And this is very striking. Before death comes to one of you. But if you translate it literally, before comes to one of you death. Why does Allah remind us, or informing us, actually instructing us? Because the ayah is very strong here, instructing us. And spend. And Allah never says, and you may spend. No, Allah says, and spend of that which we have provided you. Provided what? And why do we need to spend? Why do we need to spend? And spend what? Spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By giving charity, by doing goodness, just like Jesus mentioned in the New Testament, allegedly. And just like what the prophets of the Old Testament, very great prophets, even though they have been declared likewise in some of the verses of the Old Testament. Well, we can get through the documentary hypothesis and actually see that some of these sources, especially those with the anthropomorphic sources, if you know the documentary hypothesis, you start to realize that some of these sources actually portrays the prophet, especially if you expand it, the documentary hypothesis, beyond just the Torah, you include the historical books as well. But that's also besides this video. And spend in what we have provided you, of that which we have provided you, before comes to any one of you. What comes to any one of you? Death. We're not trying to be morbid here, but we have to look. The people of the past, our ancestors, they're gone. They're not here. And Qur'an mentions this as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala question us. All those people of old that have fabulous buildings, they have more richer than you. They have more technology, or better technology, sophisticated infrastructure and technology than you. Do you see any remains of one of them, or even hear their whisper? No. And so this is very profound. Some of these cities and for example, Petra, for example, there's there remains there. The pyramid there remains there. But what about those cities that have been completely annihilated, that we don't even know? Okay, and we will never know. Okay. But the next verse here, within the same verse, but the next few words or phrase is very striking. And so Allah remind us to spend, or actually instructing us to spend. Okay, the sayings, if you go to the hadith, it is much easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Yeah, and this is also what Jesus said allegedly in the New Testament. Okay, it is much easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, to enter Jannah. Okay. And so Allah here is instructing us to spend what Allah has given you to spend. Do not hoard your cash. Do not keep your cash. You keep it for yourself for the rainy days, but all this excess cash, whereby you just hoard cash, whereby people nowadays, even on YouTube, even when I'm looking at some Islamic channel as well, YouTube have forced advertisement on them. And if you look at some of my videos as well, especially the ones that have more plays, more views, YouTube has actually forced advertisement to be on them. And a lot of these advertisement are about money, about different country have different advertisement, but mine, whenever I play videos and play back some of my videos just to see which are the videos that have advertisement, because I never monetize and I never put any advertisement to my videos, but for some reason YouTube played this advertisement on my videos. And for example, the videos that I made about how to talk to people using the Qur'an, how to talk to difficult people using the Qur'an, the advertisement that came out was about insurance. Was about people asking you to invest in properties, to engage in all this riba, to engage in all this unnecessary usury. Some usury you have no choice because you're being forced into it, and there's different ijma about that. But for why engage in extra things that involve riba as well, usury. And so when this advertisement came out, I was like, what's going on here? So in some of the Quran videos as well that I watch, even when the surah contains surah that warns the people about riba, but the advertisement before that, asking people to engage in riba. And so YouTube forces these videos, this advertisement on videos, and I know that you can control the advert that appears, but if you do not subscribe to any advert, then you have no control. But YouTube still wants to make money. They want to make money, and so they'll still enforce adverts on your videos. And so especially the videos here is about engaging in property. It is clearly against what Allah is instructing us to do here. Okay, because when death comes to you, the ayah continues. What will you say? And this is found in other parts of the Quran as well. Okay, and in the Hadith as well. When death comes to you, what is the most natural thing to say when you see Malak al-Maut came to you? You will say, expand my life, extend my life, extend my life. Because that death, again, in the Islamic tradition, in the Quran as well, death is this destroyer of pleasure. Death is the destroyer of pleasure. And so the ayat continues, spend that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us with. Spend them towards goodness, not towards evil. Spend them toward goodness before death comes to you. Why? Because when death comes to you, the ayah continues, when death comes to you, you want to request, even if you do not believe in the supernatural, naturally when death comes to you, you wish that you have this potion, magic potion, that you can just drink or inject, whatever it is, or froze yourself, like some of these experiments. Scientists are experimenting with this. And so recently I saw an article, I'm not sure how true this article is, but I was just reading it in passing, but people are just freezing themselves to see if they can preserve themselves for how long they can, because in some parts of the country, the colder climates, animals are being frozen, they've been preserved, and when the winter season is over, when the snow melted, they rejuvenate, they came back to life. And so human beings are trying to do that as well. They're trying to preserve their heart, they're trying so much to preserve their blood. A friend was just telling me of someone, a father and a son, exchanging blood. The son donated blood to the father, the younger blood, and then the older blood is donated to the son. The blood transfusion or blood exchange. Why? So because they're trying to find means to extend their life, to prolong their life as much as possible. But Allah here is saying, you can do whatever you want to try and preserve your life for as long as possible. Okay. But the Quran says here, Allah will never grant respite to a soul, okay, when your appointed time is here. Okay. This is much later on in the ayat. I've skipped a few of the verses here, okay, just to say my point. But the Quran here is very clear. The context is that when Allah grant you wealth, okay, disperse the wealth as much as possible. Okay, keep some for your needs, obviously, because you don't want to burden others. And it is actually against the Islamic teachings whereby you gave all your wealth and then you burden other people. And so you keep for whatever you need. Okay, do not be excessive. Okay. And spread as much wealth as possible with sound intention, with sound niyah, only towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, not spend in your wealth just like what Jesus allegedly say in the New Testament. For example, if you have coin or cash, make sure it's sweat in your hand. Okay, make sure when you want to put this coin in the masjid, okay, or to give it to whoever it is, make sure it's sweat in your hand. Okay, make sure that you look around and see no one is seeing you, and then you put the money in the masjid. The coin, I don't know what the thing is called. Not that you look around, no one is seeing, and then you wait a while, and then when people start seeing you, and then you put the money inside. No, it's the other way around. Make sure you scan around and no one sees you, that you're actually trying to give sadaqah. Okay. There's an idea. For example, if you have your wallet, you have about $50 notes, $10 notes, $5 notes. Most of us, when we actually see that, we have $50 notes, $10 notes, $5 notes, $2 notes, will naturally pick the $2 notes and put it inside the masjid and give sadaqah. Naturally. that is what we used to do, because we don't want to give a lot of charity, because maybe we want to use the $10 notes to buy in the McDonald's, for example. Not that I recommend you eat McDonald's, but naturally we will want to give the lesser amount, whereas in the churches it is a different practice, especially in liberal Protestant church. You have the junior minister, or the youth minister, or the youth pastor, or the leader of that aisle, of that row. People will actually put money in the envelope, And a friend of mine that goes to church told me this back then, whereby he put some cash in the envelope and then wait for the people to collect. I think this is only, I'm not sure whether other churches practice this as well, but he went to a very liberal Protestant church, the one that engages in musical concerts and so on and so forth. I will not mention. I mean, for those of you who know, who study the Christian faith, you'll know that there are liberal churches out there. There are universal churches that engages in musical concert. One starts with B, and they are all part of this parent organization, if you want to call it that. And so he placed some cash in the envelope, and then one of the ministers opened it and says that why won't you donate more for the house of God? And so Christians are willing to give more than the Muslims, and it is true for some of the culture and practices as well. I mean, generally Muslims will always go for the lower notes, the lesser notes, and so one of the idea is that when you want to give sadaqah, make sure that you don't look at the notes that you are touching, and then you just pick whatever note that came out, and then that's the note that you will donate. And so the funny story is that because in my country, the smaller notes are usually, the lesser notes are usually smaller, and so what people will do is that they will arrange a smaller note from left to right, and so they know that every time when they go to the masjid, they just pick the notes on the most left side, because that is the one with the lesser amount. And so there's a lot of funny stories that people actually do here, but that is antithetical to what Jesus actually says. If you believe that statement of Jesus in the New Testament is actually historical, I believe it is historical because it is so aligned with the teachings of the Torah from a theological perspective. Obviously, from a historical perspective, you can find many reasons why the gospel authors want to make Jesus Jewish as much as possible, because they want to prove to the Jewish people that Jesus is actually a Jewish Messiah that they rejected. Okay, but from a theological perspective, there's so many parallels in the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels to that found in the greater Qur'an. Okay, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad SAW in the Hadith, if you accept the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament as historical, then you find that there are so many similarities. It is beyond amazement. There are so many similarities, which is why the Orientalists in the Enlightenment period, 18th, 19th centuries, 20th century to be more precise, when they started studying Islam, for example, they wrote about all this. Even John of Damascene in the 8th century, thought that the Muhammadan faith is actually a Gnostic sect, of Christianity. Obviously, he was wrong on so many occasions, but throughout the Middle Ages as well, this is the belief. Up until the time of even the advent of the 21st century, whereby more critical studies have been done on the Quran, not from an Orientalist perspective, because the Orientalist view of the Quran in the 20th and 19th century, is very, very hostile. They are very, very hostile, not only towards the Quran, even towards the Mughal Empire, even towards the Ottoman Empire, towards the Abbasid, towards the Umayyad later on. Even towards the Khulafa Rashidun, they play on the Umayyad scandal. They play on this. And if you look at writings from the Edinburgh University, especially one book I will not mention because I don't want to promote that book, actually declares that the Khawarij is actually the true Islam. And so this is completely against the Islamic tradition as to what our ulama have written, you know, and completely goes against the hadiths. Okay. Whereby the Khawarij is actually the true Islam, you know. And so you start to realize that once you read all these Western works that has been written about Islam, you know, you start to realize that especially those on the fringes or those on the minority, you know, they are being supported greatly by the Westerners. Okay. For example, you know, for those of you who do not know, Iran used to be Sunni, up until 500 years ago. Okay. Up until the time of Safavids, whereby, you know, the Ottomans, the three gunpowder dynasty. For those of you who know Islamic history, the three gunpowder dynasty is Safavid, the Mughal, okay, and as well as the Ottoman. But up until this time, majority of those in Iran were Sunni. Okay. And so if you see those clergies, they are giving talks to all these prominent Western universities, those are from, you know, the other denominations of Islam. Even though, you know, you can say that Sunni scholars have given talk as well. Okay, but those Sunni scholars are mostly liberals. If you look at it, if you look at their background, they're liberal in a sense. Okay, they don't believe in the whatever the traditional ulama believes. Okay, some of them, you know, are outright you want to call it kufr, okay, borderline kufr in whatever they say, and these are the people that are promoting Islam to the masses, because they are the ones that represent the teachings of Islam. And it is unfortunate because a lot of people are not well read today. They don't actually do their own research, you know. So whatever people say, they just take it for what it is. Especially when you have PhDs. You know, when you have PhDs, automatically whatever you say is 100% correct and should be believed. Even though you know, you shouldn't have that mindset. You should adopt critical thinking. It doesn't matter who says, even if that person has 1,000,000 PhDs, you know, because there are many works that I've read, especially in religion. Okay, there are many works that I've read whereby a lot of these scholars, they're PhD holders, you know, they have multiple earned PhDs, you know, and yet they contradict the very basic rule of grammar when it comes to, you know, the word God as being definite or indefinite article. And I've made videos about this, and so they pervert their own formula that they came up with just to prove their point, you know, even though the whole evidence is against them. And so it is unfortunate, really, in the world that we live in today, you know. And some of these works are produced by prominent universities, presses. But so returning back to our ayat here, even though, you know, we've gone on multiple tangents, by, you know, that's the way I like to do my videos. It's very unplanned, unscripted. I think is much better this way. And so, spending what Allah has provided to us. Okay. Who should spend in the way Allah has provided to us? The very opening, O you who believe. Okay, O you who believe. So this whole verse, up until the end, all the way to the end, is talking about those who believe. Allah here is not talking, even though the Qur'an is a universal message, okay, but Allah is specifically zooming in on those who believe. Okay, and if you read the verse, I wish I have the time to actually go through with you the entire. It's not that long also, to go through the entire chapter, but the earlier verses have been about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informing the Prophet sallam the characteristics of those who are hypocrite. They believe and then they disbelieve. Okay, and then they follow the Prophet sallam to Al-Madinah, the city of the Prophet. They follow to Medina, and then they say that it is better if we stay back to if we go back to where we came from. It is similar to the Jews who Musa alayhi salam, the Israelites. Okay, the Jews is an incorrect term. The Israelites, okay, when they have followed Moses, Musa alayhi salam, okay, out of Egypt, okay, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them manna and salwa, okay, they want, onion, they want garlic, they want all these vegetables, because they get all this in Egypt, even though they are slaves. Okay, but even though they are slaves, but they get all this food in Egypt. Okay, but the food that they have to get, they would rather be enslaved than to have the food that Allah have provided them. Yeah. And the best food that Allah have provided them is actually not about all this food, material food. It is actually their freedom to practice their religion, their freedom to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, because they're being persecuted, they're being made to work. They're being made to work all these temples, in Egypt. Okay, all these, they have been made to work or to do, they're slaves of the people there. And so it's very difficult for them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah brought them out of Egypt. Okay. And the whole price for freedom, is not having garlic and onions and all those vegetables. But then you have manna and salwa and the springs, the 12 springs. Now there's a difference here. In the Qur'an it is 12 springs because each tribe have their own spring. But in the Torah it is only one spring where all the tribe drink from it. Yeah, so that we should point out this difference here. But we're using the Qur'an, obviously we're talking about the Qur'an here. And so each tribe have their own springs, but they can only have manna and salwa for a time, and they would rather be enslaved, and to have onions and garlics, and to have all these vegetables, than to be free and just have manna and salwa, food that Allah has provided them, which is full of proteins, full of nutrients, And so again, if you look at the Quran deeply, and if you ponder upon the ayah of the Quran deeply, you can go into all this, manna and salwa, the bread and the quail. Okay, you have proteins in there, you have calcium, you have iron, you have zinc, you have potassium, you have all these nutrients. And so the moral of the story is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you, on the surface you might not see it, but the best price is freedom for you. The best price is freedom for you, but that is the ultimate price. But Allah will not leave you hanging. He will also give you your proteins, your zinc, your potassium. And so the moral of the story is that when Allah removes something from you, and this is mentioned in the Quran as well, He gives you something better, but you will not see it at that point of time. You will not see it at that point of time. Okay, because most of us only look at things from the surface level. For example, this is the airport. Yeah, you'll see that this is just an airport, just to hear things, but there's a lot of technology that goes into this, which we don't know, right? And so we look at things on the apparent reason, and we always like to regret and compare things to the past. But Allah is advising us against that in the Quran. When Allah removes something from you, He will give you something much better, even though it is difficult for you to grasp it at that moment. For example, if you lost a job, Okay. That job was paying you probably $10,000 a month, and then this new job you're only earning half of that, or even less than that. And so you start questioning yourself that how can this be better? How can this be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Definitely Allah would want to give me something better. Then He will give me $20,000, because I was earning $10,000 and now I'm earning $5,000. How is that better? Okay. And so if we look at things from that perspective, very materialistic perspective, that is completely against the whole teachings of the Qur'an. It is not to have welfare. It is the teaching of the Qur'an. If you want to use, I don't like to use this term, but it is an apocalyptic teachings. Okay. If you know about apocalypticism, it is not about all this Armageddon what you see. Apocalypticism is a field in itself in academic studies. Okay. Paul was an apocalyptic person. Jesus in the New Testament was an apocalyptic person. And I also believe Rasulullah SAW was also an apocalyptic person. And so does all the Anbiya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though there are different range of apocalyptic views, but I believe that Rasulullah SAW is part of an apocalyptic prophet. And for those who disagree, how can you disagree? Right? The Prophet reminds us about death. The Prophet reminds us about the coming of the world. The signs of Yawmul Qiyamah is already here. All these are apocalyptic views. And today there are even groups and sects of people, among Christianity and Islam as well, that are very apocalyptic, whereby they believe that the world is coming to an end, even within our generations. Back in the past, when the Mongols struck, the ulama of the past, the Abbasid ulama, thought that okay, this is Yawmul Qiyamah, and then it doesn't happen. And then Timur and his army came again, same disaster. Again, ulama thought that this is definitely. Ibn Taymiyyah was living the time of the disaster. Okay, and so ulama thought that this is it. When the Black Plague, the Black Death struck Europe, okay, the Catholic Church thought that this is the Parousia is here. Jesus will come soon. Some people thought that the Mongols and the Timurid armies, they were Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, And so apocalypticism is a view amongst the very, very traditional religious people. This is true for Christianity and Islam as well. Definitely, apocalypticism is not what is portrayed on TV. Those are not the academic field of study. So definitely, if the Quran is very apocalyptic, very, very apocalyptic. Not entirely apocalyptic, but very apocalyptic. Okay, because it is always constantly reminding us, okay, and mentioning Jannah. Okay, Yawmul Qiyamah, death, Maut, And so it is a very, very apocalyptic book to remind us again, okay, to remind us. And I also found that the entire Quran, if you look at all these majority passage, especially all those on apocalyptic views, okay, you can literally summarize it into this verse. Okay, obviously there are many other verses, but one of the verses include this verse that I've just recited to you. Because today and also in the past, people always want wealth. They want more money. Okay? Especially when you look at the history, the Umayyads were hoarding all this wealth. The Abbasids were hoarding all this wealth. And only during the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, Umar the second Umar, whereby ancient reports, traditional reports actually mention that it's very difficult to find poor people to give charity to. And this is also true during the time of Khulafa Rashidun. Okay. But when Islam spread on a grander scale towards the end of the Umayyad reign, obviously it spread more in the Abbasid reign, but towards the end of the Umayyad reign, Islam was becoming the Muslim empire was becoming very rich, very sophisticated, and a lot of these technologies were being introduced. The astrolabe, for example, all these instruments, and we have prominent scholars like Fakhruddin al-Razi, Ibn Khaldun, later on Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, and so you have a lot of these, Al-Maturidi, Al-Batani. You have a lot of all these great scholars. Okay? And Europe was in the very dark ages during this period of time. And it wasn't until the Enlightenment. Okay, the reason why it is called Enlightenment is like a reform of Europe. Okay. But this ayah of the Quran applies through all generations. Okay. Because when we have all this dunya, okay, it is a distraction for us from making the remembrance of Allah. Especially when we think about hoarding wealth, gaining a lot of wealth. Every single day we wake up, we want to earn more than what we earned yesterday. We want to have more than what we earned yesterday. Okay, and it's mostly not to give charity. No one in the world, who thinks about dunya, will wake up and say that, okay, today I earned more money than yesterday, and so today my intention is to actually earn money so I can give charity. I don't think anyone can declare that today. If your view is all about the dunya, if your view is all about the akhirah, then yes, definitely you wake up every single day finding people to give charity to. But how many of us actually does that? And so the Quran is not only a book for us to read, okay, and then have fun, and then it is a book for us to reflect. It is a book for us to actually ponder upon. Okay. And if you read the other two scripture, okay, which the Quran continues from it, you start to see many parallel teachings. Okay, and definitely the Anbiya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described in the Quran, especially Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam. Okay. He definitely cannot be God. If you even in the New Testament itself, because he was precisely teaching what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us here today, instructing us to do. Okay. Do not let your wealth and your children, your property, okay, your property, because the word wealth is not mentioned here. Okay. The word property, amwalukum, because property today, people, especially the advertisement, they're asking you to buy more properties. They're not asking you to work more and get more money. They're asking you to have more properties, because properties equals wealth. Okay? But properties, to have more properties for what? So you can invite homeless people to stay in this property? No, that's not their mindset. More properties so that in the future, when the market where the properties increase, because properties, especially in my country, is always going up, it's not going down, it's always going up, and so you can sell it at a much higher price. Okay, but how much higher is actually within the permissible grounds, okay, of Islam, and so that is not for me to decide. Obviously, we have the fatwa committee here to decide. I don't want to be involved in any of those things, because there's huge responsibility. But how much more do you want to sell before it is actually considered extortion? Because extortion is impermissible in Islam. Now, for example, if I bought this for, you know, $20, for example, and I'm selling it for $1,000, you know, especially towards people that are struggling to meet ends meet, those are really, really serious case of extortion. You know, for example, you know, branded brands or luxury brands, you know, they uses African slaves, for example, or Chinese slaves, for example, to build their products. Vietnamese slaves, for example, to build their products, which only cost about $10, and then they're selling it for thousands of dollars. You know, those are extortions. You know, and so that is beyond our scope here. Okay. But going back a few verses of our ayah here, you know, when death comes to you, you would scream in your heart or whatever it is. You will say that, please grant me respite, please grant me 5 more minutes, you know, please grant me 10 more minutes, please grant me 1 more year. You know, for what? For what? You know. And then the ayah here says, okay, so that I can give charity. So that I can give charity. Yeah. The Quran here is mentioning, okay, and this is why does the Quran here mention that? So that I can give charity and be amongst the righteous. Why? Why is the Quran choosing these very specific words? You know, shouldn't Allah have said that, you know, grant me respite so that I can make salah, you know, so that I can be amongst the righteous? You know, isn't that a much more appropriate verse or word to use, a phrase to use? Because the creation of human being, you know, Allah doesn't create human being and the jinn except to worship Him, right? So why does Allah not actually uses the same thing here? Yeah. Instead, why did Allah use the word so that I give charity? You know, for as-saddaqa. Why do the people, when death comes to them, they would say that extend my life so that I can give charity? You know, not so that I can make salah. You know, because don't you create jinn and mankind to worship you, right? So the more natural response here would be to actually, so that, you know, when you extend my life, I will worship you, not I will give you charity. And so this is where we have to think deep here. This is the importance of giving charity. Okay, because you can make salah your life, but if you never give charity, if you never pay your zakah, you know, you fulfill your obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because worshipping Him is between you and Him, but you have, you know, basically, if I can use the Hebrew Bible, because this is parallel to the Hebrew Bible as well, you have basically, you know, break away the second commandments. Love your neighbor like yourself, give charity. And so the Quran here is actually quoting or bringing back the teachings, okay, some of the teachings of the 10 commandments of Musa alayhi salam. Yeah. And if you are familiar with the Torah, the Hebrew Bible that we have here, no, I kept calling it Torah, and people think that I'm calling it the Torah that, you know, was revealed to Musa. No, yeah, I'm calling it Torah because that's what the Jews refer to the scripture as Torah. Okay, but you know, the Torah have been changed, and so when I'm using the word Torah, I don't mean the Torah that Allah revealed to Musa alayhi salam. Yeah, I meant the Torah as we have today, the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament, okay, / Tanakh, okay, / Torah. Even though there are different distinction, okay, but I'll just use the Torah referring to the first 5 books, the first 5 scrolls of Moses, according to the Jewish people, okay, according to Orthodox Judaism. And so returning back here, we're finishing soon inshallah. To give charity, okay, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing back the teachings of the Old Testament, the Torah, the teachings of Musa alayhi salam, and also the teachings of Isa ibn Maryam, and this is also the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, you should not neglect your moral obligations towards your peers. Love your neighbor like yourself. The hadith is very clear of sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you save a human being, it's as if you have saved the entire of humanity. And then obviously it goes on in the opposite way. And so the importance of charity cannot be emphasized here. And obviously we cannot say that I'll give, if I earn 5,000, I'll give all my $5,000. No, those are Christianity. Those are the teachings of Christianity that we found in churches today. Because it is based on the verse from Matthew and Mark, whereby Jesus says, "Sell everything and follow me in my missionary." Okay, obviously that person couldn't sell everything, and so he walked away. And then Jesus said that it is much easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. But spend in charity in whatever ways you can, in accordance to what you can. You shouldn't misunderstand here. You shouldn't sell your house, and then give charity, give sadaqah, because then you are burdening yourself. And then you're actually going against the teaching of the Qur'an. And that is part of the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring down Isa ibn Maryam. Because the Jews have overburdened themselves. Now I'm using the word Jews here, because during the time of Musa alayhi salam, his community, his kaum, were not Jews. His kaum were the Israelites. But during the time of Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam, his kaum was the Jews. His kaum, his tribe, his group. But the Judaism of his time is different from the Jews today. In fact, some scholars even argue that Judaism was actually only after or during or started during the rabbinical period, after the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD or CE. And so what could be what were the people of the quote-unquote the Jewish people of the time of Jesus called? There are many names. They call it Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, But to make it easier for people to understand, scholars just call it Jews. But scholars define their terminologies, like what I'm doing here. But we'll just call it Jews for now, even though they are not considered Jews. Because Jews, the teachings of Judaism of today goes back to the rabbinical teachings. We don't really know the teachings of the Judaism, the exact teachings of the Pharisees, Sadducees, because none of the writings of the Pharisees during the time of Jesus, the first century, actually survives, except for the writings of Paul. But Paul is not a very trustworthy figure. Even historians says that. We do not have so much writings of the Sadducees. We do have writings of the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls community at Qumran, the Q Scrolls. But apart from that, we do not have any teachings from Pharisees. Pharisees are involved with the temple precinct. The Sadducees are the scholars of the law, for example, and they are the Awam. We don't even know who they are. And the Essenes is just like the Khawarij, And then we have the Zealots, who are living in Galilee, the Zealots. But they are just like the terrorists of today. It's a bit harsh to say it, but they would engage in, they're against the Roman in Syria, Palestine, and so they engages in all those sort of things. But going back to our ayah again, we'll end soon, inshallah. To give charity is, something that will actually make you included in amongst the people of the righteous, because that is what the next verse, the next word here, phrase here actually says. Okay. And then Allah says to end, we will never grant a respite to a soul. Okay. Once the appointed time has come, we will never extend your life. Okay. We have already given you so many reminders, so many reminders upon reminders upon reminders. Okay. And the very last verse, Wallahu khabirum bima ta'malun. And surely Allah knows, Allah is all aware of what you used to do, of what you do. Allah knows what you used to do. And Allah knows what you will do also, right? And Allah knows that even when Allah give you respite, you would still revert back to your old ways. You will never give charity, because Allah has knowledge. Okay, Allah has knowledge of the unseen. Allah knows what you're going to do 10 years from now, where you don't even know. Yeah. And so we will never, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never grant you and I extension to our lives. And which is why the Qur'an is a remembrance for us, to always remember to give charity, to always remember to fulfill the obligations towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, and also towards our fellows, towards our peers, irregardless of their races and religion, irregardless of whether they have wronged us or not. Because we have to follow the Sunnah of Rasulullah. The people used to throw stones at Rasulullah. They used to inflict harm on him. But he will always make dua for them. And one of the interesting thing that he used to say, is that forgive them because they are ignorant, which is true. A lot of the people are ignorant. And how can you fault somebody apart from them being ignorant? That is their fault. But apart from that, how can you fault somebody who doesn't know? Because they don't know in the first place. For example, if you travel to a different land, if you travel to a different culture, naturally you would do things that you have been doing at home. But the things that you do is definitely against the culture of that area. But you don't know. Well, you could do research, but how much research could you do, right? Majority of the people are not academic. They don't care about research, and so sometimes they never even thought about it, because they have not been taught, and they are not academic. They don't, they, whatever it is, they are. But the key is that they are ignorant, and they cannot be faulted 100% because they are ignorant. They don't know. Because if they would have known, majority of them would not have done that. And which is true. The Prophet Muhammad make dua to the people, and majority of the people converted or reverted to Islam. Reverted to submitting themselves to submitting their will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking with me. This is definitely one of my favorite ayah of the Quran, chapter of the Quran, or verses of the Quran. There's so much that we can learn, and there's so much more we can go deeper into. We can even look at the very, very word that is being used, and so we have barely touched the surface in the past 1 hour or so. Barely touched the surface. You can go on and on for hours and hours and hours, even in Surah Al-Fatiha, you can write hundreds upon hundreds of pages. Surah Al-Fatiha, you can write hundreds and hundreds of pages. You can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of your exegesis. You can relate it to the time of when this verse was revealed, relate it to different communities, relate it to the different historical context, the different background, because the Quran is a book for the entire humanity. And so, for example, all praises be to Allah, the most merciful, the ever merciful, or the most gracious, the most merciful, whichever way you want it to be translated, out of those two. So many communities, even in my people. When I say my people, meaning my native people. They used to worship the trees. They used to worship the moon. They used to worship in all this hulu, all this spirituality, all these things. Naturalism. They believe that there's spirits to be worshipped, spirits of the wind, spirits of the tree. My ancestors. We live in the jungle. My ancestors. 200 years ago even. We were fishermen. So we pray to the god of the sea, so that the sea will be calm, and then we will get our fish. This is what my ancestors used to do. And so, but all these things that they do, they believe that there's always someone greater than all these spirits of the sea, spirits of the land, spirits of farm, spirits of the ancestor. All these. You shouldn't open your umbrella at home. They engages in all this hulu, all this, superstition in a sense. But then the Quran came to them about 200 years ago, so 250, 300 years ago, so and they can relate to Al-Fatiha, they can relate to Al-Ikhlas, because all these are basically their natural instinct. Because they believe that there's a higher power. Human beings, our natural disposition is that there's always a higher power. It is not until recently whereby modern science have made it seem that it is the survival of the fittest. That we own this world, we own this universe. We can do whatever we want. We can be evasive. For example, look at these salmon farms in the Nordic countries. How much diseases are being put in these, aquariums. The sea nets. And they're selling salmon all the way to here. Norwegian salmon, they marketed it as that. Wild salmon, they market it as that. But all these are filled with diseases, filled with filth. Look at the amount of diseases. Look at the amount of fat content there are in the salmon. And because why this is, everybody wants to be worshipped, especially in the age of social media. People post their awrat online, and then they post their peers' awrat online as well. It is very unfortunate thing that is happening. Not only that you are responsible for your own, things that you shouldn't be showing, but now you are also responsible for the person, even they are your best friend, for the things that you shouldn't expose. They are your best friend now, but when both of you are in front of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, they will blame you, to try and reap your rewards, because you exposed me things that you should not expose. You shouldn't expose my hair. you shouldn't expose, my arm, for example, especially for the woman. And so again, a lot of people, from a Islamic theological perspective, obviously, they shouldn't expose things that should not be exposed. And some of them, didn't expose themselves, but they expose other people's aurat, and so it is very, very unfortunate. And so, and again, some people, they post that they're giving charity here and there. They could be, they could have a sound intention, but what about again, if you use the New Testament, what about holding the cash in your hands and make sure it sweat, before you give in charity? Make sure that no one is looking at you when you give charity, not to be seen of others, and so it is better for people to not post when they go to the haram, al-haram, they go to Medina, and you can film for your own memories, you can film, but you shouldn't, some people use the whereby they want to motivate other people. They want to motivate other people here and there. But if you have sound intention like that is fine. But you're also opening up yourself to be attacked by, the devil, in a sense. Shayateen. You're opening up yourself. Shayateen could corrupt Iblis could corrupt your sound intention, which you had at first, but after you post few videos, you start to realize that people say, MashaAllah, Akhi, you went to this place, MashaAllah, and then it starts getting to you, even though the Islamic words are being used. People say Assalamu alaikum to you, but Iblis works in a very smart ways, and you have to outsmart Iblis in a sense, even though, you can never outsmart Iblis. That's why I think, which is why you can never outsmart Iblis. You can only try to shield as much of him as possible from you, and so there's so many cracks. We are not even at the level of the ulama, for example. And even the ulama, got tempted by the shayateen from amongst jinns and mankind, and so we are very vulnerable. We have to try our best, try to remind ourselves when we read the Qur'an, try to remind ourselves as much as possible, even though we will definitely falter through the cracks, definitely. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, is the most gracious, and so we should turn back to Him. Okay, we should turn back to Him. And one of the tricks of the shayateen, especially shayateen amongst mankind, is that they will say that you are so far away from the religion, there's no hope for you. These are the human shayateen. Okay. A friend of mine many years ago mentioned that there's no hope for me. I already have a name for me, a place for me there in Jahannam. That is what he mentioned. And so the shayateen has gotten to him. Whereas Allah says in the Quran, for as long as you are still here, for as long as you have the ability to make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that He will forgive you. And this is the Quran, and the promise of Allah is true, and humankind are ever ungrateful. The most merciful person came to you and says that I will forgive you, just ask me for forgiveness. and then you say that I'm so far off, you will never forgive me. It just doesn't make sense to me, right? And so, for example, if someone says that, I will give you money, okay, just you need to ask, okay, and then you say that, I'm so poor, you will never give me the amount of money that I need or that I want, but that person is saying that, no, I will give you whatever it is that you ask for. You just need to ask. Allah says that He will forgive you. Turn to me and I will forgive you. You just need to ask forgiveness from me, But that level of arrogance that human being has, they wouldn't prostrate their forehead to the floor, because a lot of people see that as a very, whereby you just lost control of yourself as a human being. You are no longer dignified. You are a slave, because you prostrated your head to the floor, meaning you are a slave. Yeah. And so the shayateen would market it that way to you and say that, you are a human being, you are a superior person. Why would you want to prostrate the same way the shayateen never prostrated to Adam alayhi salam? Okay. But Allah is saying, no, I will forgive you. I will give you Jannah to Firdaus even. You just need to prostrate to me and beg me for forgiveness and try your best not to repeat the mistake. But if you repeat the mistake, okay, I'm the most forgiving. So you just need to, make sujood. 5 times a day you need to make sujood. But the amount of arrogance that a human being has, they wouldn't even not prostrate to anyone, but prostrate to the one who actually made them. So instead of having to deal with this, they just invent something like a very, smart escape, but not really smart at all. They just say that the person who created us doesn't exist, so that solves all our problem. And so they just brush this natural disposition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instilled in them, and then just declare, even though they don't believe this, because it doesn't make sense, the argument that they use. Okay. It is not within this video, but I'll just mention briefly, so I don't have to dedicate a separate video for this. But instead of just worshipping to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they just declare that God don't exist. The watchmaker argument. Okay, I'll not mention the name, but you know who. Okay. The horseman argument. Okay, the argument from this horseman. Okay. And so all these are ridiculous arguments that I can't believe people actually took on board, especially the argument whereby there's so much suffering in this world, therefore God don't exist. Because if God exists, the loving God exists, He wouldn't allow suffering. But those people have taken this view from the biblical God as portrayed in the Bible, okay, as loving, compassionate, and so it is impossible for God to allow suffering, because if God allows suffering, meaning God is not loving, God is not merciful. Why would God create a human being just to make them suffer in a sense? And so these are the arguments that are being portrayed out there. It is a very emotional argument, but it is embedded in a technical way, meaning to say that it is an emotional argument, but it has been sugar coated to make it seem that it is actually not an emotional argument, so that it has weight in an academic setting. Whereas if for example, if a murderer were to murder someone, okay, and then the the family of that victim goes to court and say that, my son got killed, or my children got killed, there's so much suffering in the world, my son suffer, if the murderer exists, if a human being exists, a human being that is so kind, so compassionate exists, then my son wouldn't have been killed. So therefore the murderer don't exist, because the murderer used to be a very compassionate person. He was always kind, he always gave us food, so on. He was very loving, but then he murdered my son, for example. And so I've just been living in a dream, and that murderer don't exist. That argument it doesn't make sense. That argument doesn't make sense. We're not questioning whether God has the ability to inflict harm upon people. The argument is not that. The main point of the argument, the central way of the central point of the argument is that because there's suffering, meaning the person who actually causes the suffering doesn't exist. That is the crux of the argument, which is illogical. Because people can cause suffering to other people. Does that mean that the other people that causes suffering doesn't exist? And so in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also the most compassionate, the most loving. And this is something the Orientalists found it very difficult to reconcile. How can someone that is so compassionate, so gracious, so merciful, still, destroy the world through earthquakes, so on and so forth? They just found it hard to reconcile. And then some of them even goes to the extent whereby, if God can do something like that, I don't believe in God. That is an emotional argument. That is an emotional argument. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of the world. He can do whatever he wants. And who are we to question his decree? Who are we to question the things that he wants to do? Who are we to question his sifat? Who are we to question the things that he has planned for? Why does he have to cause human being to die? Because that is the main crux of the argument, if you look at it deeply. Because all these sufferings doesn't mean anything if human being doesn't die. So the whole argument is that why do we need to die? Why do we need to live in poverty? If a human being doesn't die, these problems of the God causing people to suffer, so much famine, it doesn't mean anything, because we are immortal. It doesn't mean anything. The main reason is that human being doesn't want to die, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in this verse, when your appointed time has come to you, we will not grant you respite. That is the main argument here in the Quran. People can market their argument, these atheists. They can market the argument in whatever way they can. They just don't have the nerve to say that, as a human being, if God exists, why does he need to cause us to die? Because we die, that's why God don't exist. That is the argument that they want to say, but it gets stuck somewhere there, because it makes them look ridiculous. But all these sufferings, all this earthquake, for example, if a 1,000-ton boulder were to drop on you and you still be alive, you would have no harm on you. The whole atheist argument about suffering and things like that, it won't mean anything, right? the fact that human beings die, that is the problem that they have, which is why you see a lot of them clings to life. Yeah. And so anyway, I digress. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me. If you've stuck this long, I highly recommend you to read the Qur'an, to give in charity as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have instructed, to be kind to your brothers and sisters, to your neighbors, not only in your action but also in whatever that came out from your mouth, your speech. Whatever amal that you do is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. If you can do good deeds without anyone knowing them, it is much better for you. If you have to showcase your amal to the world, then think again. If you found that it is a way to benefit the people, then by all means. But if you found that there are more harm, even though the very thing that you want to do is goodness, and to be motivational, so on and so forth. But my advice to myself and to you is that it is better not to be publicly known for what you do, than to lose your standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whatever things that you do that are unrighteous, as much as possible, do not expose yourself, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have actually kept these things hidden from public's view. And so you do not have the rights to actually expose the unrighteous things that you do. Everyone does unrighteous things, but the difference is that someone who openly does them and someone who does them in secret. In secret is all between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is the most merciful, most forgiving. Once Allah have forgiven you, He will not expose you unless you expose it yourself. Always be careful in whatever you say. Sometimes it is a slip of the tongue, but we should always acknowledge the mistakes that we do, and all goodness comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. All the things that we do in life, our success, it doesn't come from us. Just because we put in all the hard work doesn't mean that we should say that it is incumbent upon us that success as before. We demand success. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who grants us success in whatever ways and means. Success doesn't always equate to social status and standing in the properties that you own. Success is the standing between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those are the success that is immeasurable. And we shouldn't measure them. We shouldn't find out that how much reward will we get if we give $10, $50. Reward is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Whatever you do, as much as possible, your intention should be 100% for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes in front of our colleagues, in front of our friends, we will engage. I plan to give $2 today, but because my colleague is here or my friends is here, I will give $100. I mean, these are all realistic things that we do. And so all we can we can hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still accept our good deeds, even though we're not ikhlas in doing them, not sincere in doing them, but that is between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our deeds. And sometimes when we feel that we are so lazy to make salah, the shayateen from the human being will say that your salah is not even up to standard, might as well you don't make salah. Those don't listen to those kind of mindset. It is better for you to make salah and not be in full concentration than to not make salah at all. Because you are actually trying your best to fulfill Allah's commandment, okay, that is impending upon you, no matter how difficult it is, okay, you still you still do your obligations, and so even when you go to the masjid, you're praying behind the imam, and you're not always concentrating for whatever reason. It could be the food that you eat, the riba that you engages in, because all this plays a factor. But you still have to stand behind the imam and make salah. You still have to do your fundamental obligations. Whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your salah or not, that is between Him. It is not for you to decide, right? The very thing that we should do is we should just do what has been commanded by our Rabb, and that is the advice that I would like to give to myself and to you. And in amongst the non-Muslim circles, based on my experience, it is always a morbid topic to talk about death. Okay, whereas the Qur'an is completely apocalyptic. It reminds us constantly about death, about your appointment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the appointed time. Okay, and so the more we should remind ourselves of death. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to advise us to go and visit the graves, because someday you will be like them. He will remind you of death. Whereas in some culture, visiting the grave is actually taboo, because they do not want to be reminded of death, because death is actually, the stopping of the pleasures of the dunya, the pleasures of this world, and people do not want to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do not want to return to their Rabb. Okay, they want to enjoy this dunya as much as possible, but this world is temporary. Okay, and we do not need to look at the scriptures to understand this. We just have to look at the people that our ancestors, the people that have gone before us. They'll never come back to life, within our lifetime. They'll never come back to life. And so that in itself is a reminder for us that no matter how much enjoyment we engage in this world, no matter how much wealth we hoard, okay, we would rather keep our money in the bank account just to show to people that we are the richest man in the world, than to actually give in charity. Okay, and some of them engages in charity work, no doubt. Yeah, but the percentages of their charity is atrocious in a sense, and it is just mostly for public view. Okay, especially if you do not believe in the last day, if you are not apocalyptic in your view. Again, go and study apocalypticism of the past. Sadducees are not apocalyptic, by the way. They do not believe in Yawmul Qiyamah, Sadducees. When, again, if you do not know the Sadducees, I have videos on this when I talk about introduction to the New Testament, the Greco-Roman world, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I'll end my video here, inshallah, and I'll see you on my next video. I'll try to do more theological videos as requested by some of you. Again, when we discuss theology, it's a very different topic. It is more like preaching, preacher mode, because that is the field of theology in a sense, whereas the field of history is a very much different field. But these two needs to be taken into consideration. We cannot just ignore theology and not have history, and we cannot ignore history without having. We cannot do history without having theology, in a sense. Okay. Anyway, my name is Arfat. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.